Now this week is British Flower Week, and what better way to celebrate than to have some fantastic locally grown blooms that have come from the Gower Peninsula. So for those of you who have been watching my videos for a little while will know I come from South Wales and I live on the Gower Peninsula, and I have these delightful flowers. I'm really lucky to be able to choose some locally grown produce from a farm called the Rowan Tree. They're in their first year of production, ready for customers to purchase flowers from, and hopefully they're providing us with flowers throughout the summer for weddings where our beautiful brides are looking for flowers that are organically grown, locally sourced, and of course much better for the environment. So what are we going to do today? Well, I have this quite large Zinc bucket, which I thought would really represent British Flower Week and would show off these blooms to their best advantage. And I'm going to use some chicken wire. So this is just wire netting that will be used to hold our flowers into position. Rather than using floral foam, which isn't quite as good for the environment, we're going to stay quite traditional and use some good old-fashioned traditional methods. And what I've done with this wire netting, now this one is quite thick, quite sturdy, and I think if you're new to flower arranging, this might not be the best option for you to start with. I would choose something that is a bit more pliable and easier to work with. And if you're new to arranging with chicken wire as well, or wire netting I really should call it, then consider wearing gloves, because the tips here where I've cut using quite a strong pair of wire cutters can be a little bit fierce and they can be quite sharp and pointed. So always be quite mindful when you're creating designs and you're making shapes with the wire netting, because this can be quite sharp. So what I've done is I folded it almost over on itself twice. I've got a length that's approximately 3 times the width of my container. So if you think about that, it's 1, 2, 3, and it's narrow enough that it's going to sit in my container quite comfortably. So if I just hold that forward for you to see, that's how it works there in the container. And we need to have a double layer so that when we insert the stems in, they have 2 points of contact, so they don't flop about at the top. If I just show you what happens, if we have one layer and we arrange in, the top will just flop forward. So what we need to do is have a double layer. Now this is the way I arrange in wire netting. This might not be how other people do it, and I always equate this to baking a cake or cooking your evening meal. There's more than one method. I nearly said there's more than one way to skin a cat. But there's always more than one method to creating your mechanics to make a flower design. So you know, if you've watched another video and you've seen it made a different way, or you've watched one of my previous videos and I've done a different style, then that's okay. It's you know, more than one method. So you'll see that I've just folded that over all the stem ends, or not the stem ends, the wire ends, so that they're neat and they're not going to stick in the stems of the flowers. I'm going to do the same on the opposite side, and it's almost creating a cushion. So I quite often refer to this as a cushion. Gives you a solid structure to insert your stems into. And often with locally grown produce, the flowers are quite soft stemmed themselves. So you think of flowers like cornflowers or nigella, maybe sweet peas, sweet William. And if they're soft stemmed, then they're going to damage quite easily when we're inserting them in. So the less spikes and the less damage we can cause to those stems, the better. Now you can see now that I have the 2 layers. We have this top section here and one underneath. And then when I arrange into the 2 sections, it's going to hold that flower far better into position. Whereas if we had only one, we've got that movement on the top there, and you won't get such a strong and robust shape. So then what I'm going to do is just fold the corners in slightly, not losing that 3-dimensional shape again. I don't want to lose the 2-tier section. And you just want to squish it about a bit so that it fits comfortably into that container. Now you of course can spend a little bit more time doing it than I have, but that gives you an idea. That gives you an idea of what we're trying to create. So a good solid structure, firmly attached there on the top. And if you want to, you can of course use the floral tape to add some extra security over the top. Now the flowers I'm using today are quite lightweight. I don't have a great deal of heavy material. Maybe if this was the autumn time and I had hydrangeas or maybe some twigs and some branches to go in, I would give that possibly some extra security. And again, if you don't want to use the tape, which is of course a single-use plastic, then you could tie that quite nicely off with some natural twine, but we get a really good strong mechanic there for you to use. Now I'm going to arrange in the bigger one because I've got quite a lot of flowers, so just to get rid of that one for a moment. And then we need some fresh, clean water, preferably with some flower food in there to help your flowers last that little bit longer. My cushioned effect is placed into the bottom of my container, or actually it's not really at the bottom, it's almost in line with the top of my container. And there are quite a few different ways of inserting foam into your container, but this one is going to work for me today. And then we'll top it up with water. Now for today, I've only probably got 2 inches or so in the bottom there, and that's because if I decide that I want to lean the container forward at any point during the video, I'm not going to have any leakage or water spilling out. But realistically, when you're at home, these very natural wild flowers are thirsty drinkers, especially when it's hot like it is at the moment. So you need to keep that topped right to the top and keep adding water to it on a regular basis. They're thirsty drinkers and they need lots of water. Now, one thing I often say when we're arranging in this style is that let the flowers speak for themselves. Don't try and create too much of a contrived shape. Just let the flowers sit and arch and bend the way they naturally want to go without trying to force it into any particular shape. Once floral foam was invented in the sort of early 70s, then we started using very strong geometric shapes like triangles and circles and squares. You'll often hear me talk about them, and of course they're in the Back to Basics series of videos. But before we had floral foam, flowers were far more naturally arranged and we didn't worry too much about creating any outline shape. So we're just going to see how the design comes together. Now for me, I like to start with the stronger flowers first, and for today's design it's going to be the Sweet William, and I've probably got a polychromatic colour harmony today. So later at the end we've got some orange geums that are going to be added in, but I've pretty much got most colours. I maybe haven't got yellow, but I've got lots of colours from the colour wheel. But of course, if we think about Sweet William, they are very traditionally these pinks and purples, magentas, lilacs, and of course white. So we're going to start with these, and they're almost going to form a cushioned effect. Now that one has brought a little slug with him, so we've got a friend to accompany us. Now we're going to start by almost creating a basework or groundwork, and I often explain this in it's like we're arranging in layers. So this layer is my bottom layer, and then we're going to add some more delicate flowers on top of it to create an overall shape and an overall style. This one already happens to be short, so this is the flower that I'm going to use more towards my focal point. I obviously can't make that any longer. Fortunately, if it had been any shorter, or rather unfortunately, if it had been any shorter, I wouldn't have been able to use it in the design there at all. But I've angled it forward. So if you look at it from the side, it's angled forward and it's slightly in at that radial position. And that's going to be my base flower. And then I'm going to work up and work my shape around it. Now, I don't think there's a real set pattern for arranging this type of flower arrangement. I'm starting in the base, and I'm starting with the heavier, stronger material towards the focal point. So again, in the autumn, this might be bigger flowers like hydrangeas. And we're going to get lighter and softer as we work towards the end. So pieces like this, which are smaller, we can keep to add in towards the end. But the larger heads for the moment, I'm going to use towards this centre point. I'm giving everything a nice clean cut, and I'm making sure that we don't have any debris, any leaves or thorns that are going to be below the water point or below the water level. So if we just spin that around, no set pattern. At the moment I've got quite a lot of magenta on that side, so we'll balance that off by bringing something lighter on the opposite side. And of course, what you've got to remember with these types of flowers, it's not like when you buy them from the Dutch flower auction and you have 10 heads that are identical in size and identical in shape. All these heads are going to be different. And my Sweet William are going to be different. The colours are going to be different. The texture within the head is going to be very different. So we won't really get that perfect style that we often try to achieve when we have floral foam. So again, if we think about it now and we look at it from the side, you'll see that I've got varying heights. So we get interest and we get depth within the arrangement. We're not trying to keep them all flat. Far more natural in this manner. And at the moment I've got quite a nice centre core. I haven't yet brought anything towards the back. So you can see how that's sitting quite comfortably in those 2 layers of the wire netting, and I haven't got to worry too much about them falling out or flopping either side of my container. Now at this stage you might be thinking that it's quite short compared to the size of the container that I've got, but bear in mind that I'm starting close to my container and I'm working outwards, so this is going to end up quite large by the time we've finished. Now let's bring some visual weight towards the back. So we want to have some of the colour brought through, and you'll know that from the other videos that I've done, this creates visual weight, so it makes your eye travel backwards, and it also gives you actual weight, so it stops your design from tipping forward, and the colour will make your eye travel all the way through the design to the back to give you depth, and that's really quite important. So I think we'll bring one more through there at the back. I'm going to keep a few of the smaller heads to bring towards the outside, so we're linking the colour and the texture through to the edge. And what I've got to remember is that these 2 handles are on the sides. I've got to remember to try not to twist my design as I'm making it, which is something I quite often do. Right, so I think that's coming along quite nicely. Obviously it's just my first placement, and this design doesn't have any extra foliage. It only has the foliage in that's been supplied with the flowers. That's intentional for this design because I felt that sometimes when you're learning to do just flower arranging for yourself at home, or whether you're training to be a florist and you want to have this as your career, sometimes foliage can be hard to get hold of. And you know, with these very soft natural flowers that come from a local flower farm, they're almost wild, very informal in their style. Sometimes adding foliage in can make it quite heavy and quite artificial looking. So for today we're sticking with just the flowers. But what I do have to add some texture and a different shape is this fabulous Honesty. Now this one is a white Honesty, and I'm used to seeing Honesty in a mauvey sort of lilac colour, but this one I'm sure was absolutely wonderful when it was in the field. But it's now turned to those interesting seed heads, and we have these circular shape which will dry naturally and turn into paper thin, almost translucent little circles. So a really good one if you're looking to create designs that are very natural and informal, and you want that country look to your flower arrangement, then this is a great one to have in the garden, and it will self-seed quite easily and give you lots of texture and lots of interest. Absolutely fantastic. I love these, and I really look forward to these coming up every year. The colours are always fantastic. Now, we're going to go a little bit taller with these materials. We've created the base layer with the Sweet William. And the Sweet William, of course, is one of the dianthus family. So if you're from a part of the world that doesn't grow the Sweet William, this grows easily in the UK. It's a summer garden plant, and it's part of the carnation family, and quite traditional in cottage gardens here in the UK. Remember, any small little pieces that have snapped or broken off, keep them, and you can arrange them in another container or another vase. And again, I'm not looking for the design to be perfectly symmetrical. If we look at this now, my sides aren't perfectly identical. I've just worked with the material that I've been provided with. Now, that filler material that we've used called Honesty is quite large and quite dominant, so I have to work alongside it. This delightful little seed head, I suppose I could describe it at the stage it is now. And it's very much like Flaspy. If you've seen me arrange before, you'll have seen me use something called Flaspy Green Bells. But this is a variety of Cress. It is just wonderful, and I've never seen this before, and that's one of the beauties, I think, of having locally grown flowers that have come from a local farm, is that the grower is not necessarily growing flowers that we're familiar of seeing from the Dutch auction. They're looking for things that are a bit different and a bit unique, and I was delighted to have this in my mix bucket this week. And hopefully we'll be able to have this a bit more through the summer as well, because this would work so well in hand ties for brides and of course bridesmaids. It's a nice soft and light and airy feel. And initially I'm just again going to add a few pieces in towards the centre. We don't want to overfill this type of arrangement. Think about its natural environment where the butterflies and the bees would fly in between, and that's the same type of feeling that I'm trying to create, nice and airy and soft. So these smaller pieces I'm going to angle towards the outside to make my design maybe wider than it's going to be tall, but we'll see how it progresses as we go along. Isn't that wonderful? Just fantastic. And it's a gorgeous grey toned seed head, which picks up beautifully with the grey colour in my base. And I've just got one piece which will work really well towards the back as well, and give me some material and some colour there through to the back. If you're making something like this for maybe your local church and it's going to be up tight against a wall, then you will have to make this quite short and much flatter at the back, but you still need to have weight. There's nothing worse than you creating an arrangement, transporting it to the location, and at the very last hurdle the whole thing tips forward and falls apart. So you need to add weight, even if it's just low down flowers cut short at the back there, because it is at risk of tipping forward if you have too much weight at the front. Okay, now I have a lovely Allium. This is just wonderful. The flower is delightful, a soft lilac colour, and again it's a big flower. It's quite visually attractive. So this Allium is quite a large head. It's a circular shape, and I'm going to use a few of these towards the centre. This will help strengthen that focal point there in the middle, and I'm going to use the shorter ones towards the front, and then I'm going to add some towards the outside. Now what you need to remember, and this is quite important in this style of arranging, is that all your stems are down where your water source is. It's no good putting them in diagonally and then missing the water supply at the bottom. Now, of course, the Allium is related to the onion family, so they can be a bit pungent and a bit strong when you cut into them, and they are exceptionally pretty to look at, but unfortunately the smell can be a bit overpowering for some people. So you'd need to be a bit mindful if you were considering using these in a bridal design or a bridesmaid's design, because the smell might be too much for them. And I would possibly limit them on a table in a wedding venue as well, because they might be a bit overpowering when you're sitting eating your afternoon meal. The head and the colour is delightful. It's so pretty, very pastel, really lovely. Okay, so just have a look at it every now and again. Look to see if the colours are fairly evenly distributed. Try and consider having different shapes at different parts of the design as well. And again, I'm not trying to create that perfectly symmetrical look, but we do need to try and consider a fairly even distribution of the colour. Right, okay, let's just remove this vase and see what we've got next. And I think we'll leave those to last. That's the beautiful cornflower. Now, one of the stronger stems of flowers I've got, oh, we've just got one tangled up there, is the foxglove. So I'm going to go in with a foxglove next because it's quite a robust flower. The reason I'm not putting in the cornflowers straight away is because the stem is very soft, it's fragile, the head itself is very delicate. And I feel that when I go to put in the lupin, well, they're not lupins, I've been calling them lupins all day. When I go to put the foxgloves in, there's chance of me damaging those soft, little, fragile, delicate stems of the cornflower. So I'm going to go in now with probably the flower that's going to be my longest within the design. And this is, of course, not a lupin, it's indeed a foxglove. And again, in this part of the world and most of the United Kingdom and the British Isles, we have this growing wild in the hedgerows. But if you're like me, I love to have these in the garden. But it is a poisonous plant, and the whole part of this plant is poisonous. If you have sensitive skin, you might find that it's an irritant to your hands when you're working on it as well. So even though for creating a video today, I'm going to use it, I wouldn't, unless I was asked to use it, I'm unlikely to ever use this in a wedding design where there was a risk of somebody touching it. If you can imagine a child picking it up, or somebody handling it, overhandling it at a wedding, I would be very reluctant to use them. I do see them quite often in wedding photos and magazines and that type of thing, but I would be quite worried about using this within a design. But they do have gorgeous shapes, and it's a really interesting texture. It's a completely different shape to the round heads that we've used so far. So that lovely foxglove, it's almost like a little bell flower. And I've mentioned before in videos the linear material, so anything that's long and tall and has that spike effect. So we refer to these as spikes or points. They often look far better on the outside of the design, where you can really appreciate that linear shape of the stem. Now, the stem end, you'll see, is turned at a slight angle, and that's because so you'll see by so you'll see by the shape of the foxglove, it's got that almost twisted section on the top, and that's because it's being turned in towards the light. It's my rubbish bins being collected if you're wondering what the racket is. So you can see by the linear shape of the foxglove that the top section is slightly bent, and that's because it's searching for the light and it's turning for the light. So what you can't do with this type of flower is put it in horizontally into the design, because the tip, the growing tip there, will continue to grow away. And this is one factor that you really need to learn about your flower types and your flower shapes, is what's their natural habitat, how do they grow and how do they bend and twist in an arrangement. There's nothing worse than creating a fantastic pedestal where you have these wonderful plant materials sticking out to the side, and by the following morning they've moved upwards and you now have almost 2 arms sticking out on the side of your pedestal. Now the colour combination is wonderful. We've got that delightful dark centre and the white on the outside, so it really does pick up beautifully on my colour combination, and I'm making sure they're really down well into the foam. And I'm going to spread them out. If we look at this from the side, that's the best angle, that's probably the best angle there. If we look at this from the side now, if we think of these 3, why do I keep thinking they're lupins? If we think of these 3 foxgloves, they're almost flat, they're almost in a line, and that gives that 2-dimensional effect that I'm trying to stop you doing. So by creating, or placing I should say, this lupin in towards the back, it now gives my design depth, and my eye now has something else to look at rather than following this very straight severe line across the front. So straight away that adds in some 3-dimensional movement. And at the moment my foxgloves are almost quite formally placed. The gap between them is very similar, and I don't want that style of arrangement. So what we're going to do, fortunately I have quite a few of these. I want to stop that almost regimental soldier effect at the back. It's almost like guards on parade all standing in line. And this one, now I always encourage you to look at the material that you've got. Which way is it shaped? Which way is it growing? Which way do the bells on the foxglove look the best? Always try and arrange so you're showing the head off for its natural beauty, and we're not hiding anything and preventing the flower head from being seen. Now if we think of this lupin, we've got all the flower heads up in this section here. If I squash it down really tight into the design, all of this gets hidden and damaged. So I'm trying to keep them quite tall and above that baseline of flowers that we've already put in. And then we don't lose any of that natural beauty of that wonderful flower. And again, if we turn it round to the side, hopefully you can see that the lupins, foxgloves, so hopefully you can see from the side angle that the foxgloves are at different levels. They're radiating from the centre point, but they're at different heights and different levels. It gives us a lot more interest in the arrangement. So if you remember back to when we've talked about the elements of design, I've talked about rounds and I talked about spikes and I talked about transitional material. Already I have all 3. I have a round which contrasts beautifully against the spike or the point material, and then I have a soft transitional material that floats in between and connects the 2 flowers together to create a really attractive design. Right, okay, so from this position that I'm looking at it here, I can still see a little bit of the wire netting. From the angle you're looking at it from, that's probably already hidden. And you can see now why I didn't choose to use any foliage, because the design is nice and soft and very airy. And now I can go in with my pretty little blue cornflowers, and of course we've got lots of that wispy bud on there as well, which I'm not going to get rid of. A bit shorter with these, I think. Luckily all the flower stems are clean on the bottoms. So not only are the cornflowers blue, but we've also got a few shades of pink. We've got a couple of lilac in there as well. So a real feast of colours, absolutely delightful to work with. And we'll put these in at different heights, some tall, some short, and then you get that really nice wispy effect throughout the arrangement. What we start to find now is as the design becomes about 3/4 of the way full, it starts to get a little bit more difficult to insert the flower stems through into the wire netting. So at this stage, start to take your time and gently insert the stem ends in. Again, what I've done is I've made sure that we've got all flowers on different heights so that we create that impression of 3-dimension, and there is space created in and around the flowers. We're not trying to overfill and squash everything into the flower arrangement. Now don't forget, I mention it all the time, ensure that you've got some material to the back. Helps bring your eye all the way through. These are just absolutely wonderful to work with. Now remembering, of course, don't forget to make sure the stem end is clear of any debris. And one of the benefits of arranging in the chicken wire, sort of the wire mesh, is that if you feel that a flower is in the wrong position, you can quite easily pull it out and move it into a different place. You don't have to worry about creating any holes like you do when using floral foam. So, you know, there are lots of added bonuses. And I think the garden type flowers like this, the meadow style flowers, last much better when they're in fresh clean water rather than in floral foam. The soft delicate stems much prefer to be in water rather than foam. What I'm doing with a few of the heads, I'm just taking off the main flower head itself. We've got quite a lot of the wispy stem ends. I just want a bit of extra to create some of the blue colour down lower in the arrangement. And again, you know, think about those levels that we're working at. Don't have everything squashed in and hiding other flowers. So what do we think so far? Now I've kept a few longer pieces of the Sweet William, just again to bring some of the colour out towards the outside. I like these ones that are curved and have a bit of shape to them. So these would work really well on the outside edge. And I'm going to have to start working a bit slower now and really concentrate where I'm putting those stem ends. This is an interesting shape. Fantastic for a crescent shape design, that one. This is going to work really well on this side. And I can still, from this side, I can still see some of the gaps in the chicken, in the wire mesh and the netting. And I'm going to bring a few to the back as well, just to get that weight through to the back. And we're all done with that colour and that flower texture. Now at the moment we're pretty much tints, tones and shades of purples and blues, but I have got a really nice zingy orange. This one is Geum, and you might not be familiar with Geum. It is sold as a cut flower, but far more popular as a garden flower. And as it's a new flower, this one is almost a tangerine sort of orange, and then as it opens it becomes darker in its colouring. Goes very well with my coral coloured top. And this is going to give us a bit of a zing of colour, and really I think adding these mixed colours really is very reminiscent of a meadow or a wildflower patch. And of course, if your colour scheme is just purples and blues, you could have kept it with those simple colour combinations. But for me, I really wanted to bring in this nice bright tangerine, this lovely zingy orange. Nice clean cut. Ensure that those stems are right down in the water so that they keep hydrated for as long a period as possible. Gorgeous for a summer wedding this would be. You could have these sitting outside the marquee, you could have them on the bar. Really quite pretty. And I think we've got one more. Just clear off a little bit of the rubbish. Where are we going to put this final one? I think more towards the centre. And I think, hopefully, we've got a really nice design. I'm very pleased with that. It's turned out really well. And I love using all these gorgeous, soft, sort of meadow type flowers. We don't get to use these a great deal. But I'm hoping that's a real good example of fresh flowers, locally grown, to help promote British Flower Week. And again, if you've been enjoying the videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment or ask a question. If you're unsure of any of the names I've mentioned, you'll find them in the comment box below, in the description box. And, you know, get out there, pick some flowers from the garden, go and find a flower farm close to you and enjoy these amazing flowers. And we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.